In this Algebra 1 video, we're going to be in Chapter 4, Lesson 3, writing equations in point-slope form. Now, as a reminder, this is point-slope form. We've mentioned it in a past video, but we didn't really explore what it's for. But here's what I want to tell you guys. Anytime you're asked to write an equation, I want you to know you can start a linear equation. Any of those problems can be started with point-slope form, and then we're going to do our thing. So our objective is, as the student, I can write equations in point-slope form, and I can convert it to different forms because I will use my, what I call equation skills. Meaning, everything we're going to do, we're going to put it in this form first, because this form is our friend. It converts to every other form. So there's no reason to learn another way. I'm teaching you one way that works for all linear equations. You can start all of them just like this. Let's take a look. Alright, so point-slope form in its pieces. Let's talk about its pieces. Ignore the stuff down here for now. Its pieces are this. This is the same form that I showed you, but let's look at the color coding. M is the same thing it's always meant. M means slope. Alright, so that means the same thing. Now, x1 and y1. These are the only things that you plug in for. When you're using point-slope form, you will never plug in for these. You'll never plug in for those. You'll only plug in for x1 and y1. Very similar, essentially the same way you would do the slope formula. However, if you're given multiple points to choose from, let's say 2, 3, I'm just making these up by the way, 3, 7, you don't have to write these down. If you have multiple points, the beauty of point-slope form is you only have to pick one of them. You could pick that one, or you can pick that one. It doesn't matter, as long as you pick one of the points. So for point-slope form, pick one of the points, and it doesn't matter which one. That point becomes x1, y1. So plug in your x-coordinate, plug in your y-coordinate, plug in your slope, you're ready to go. Now, I kind of already gave away the steps at the bottom. Step 1 is find the slope. In some questions, in the beginning, I'm going to give you questions where the slope's already given. But what's going to happen is you're going to get to questions where the slope's not given. And if the slope's not given, you're going to have to find it yourself. And remember that slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We'll get to that in the future, but for now, just know if you don't know the slope, you're going to have to find it yourself. But like I said, in this section, for most questions, you're already going to be given the slope. Anyways, that was step 1. Step 2 is plug in the slope, and then plug in your ordered pair into its spots. Once you plug those 3 in, you're in point-slope form. Point-slope form requires no work. You literally just plug in. But here's why we care about point-slope form. Step 3 is, if you're asked to turn it into another version, point-slope form can convert to those other linear equation forms, such as, remember we talked about standard form? Well, point-slope form can turn into standard form. Remember we talked about slope-intercept form? Well, point-slope can turn into slope-intercept form. And the one that gets the most attention is slope-intercept form. But my point is, you can turn point-slope form into all of those. By the way, this slide should look very familiar. I don't think you should have to write it again. You wrote this in, I copy and pasted this from your video on graphing standard form with intercepts. So this is straight from that video, so you should already have this. But recognize, you at least need to list these. You at least need to know the 3 types of linear equations and make sure you know them. It's almost like vocabulary, because I want to show you, we're going to start things off like this, but this always turns into any form you want. So first we're going to make sure we practice plugging in correctly. Now for this example, to save you effort, you don't necessarily have to draw this graph. I mostly want you to focus on what we're about to do with this graph. So let's say you had 2 points. I just want to give you a visual. You're welcome to copy if you want to, but here's what we really care about. If you have a graph, okay, and let's say you know that it goes through this point. And most of the time, they'll just use words. They'll say, write the equation of the line that passes through this point, and then they'll name that point I just put in black, and they'll say, and its slope is this. Well, if they don't give you the slope, here's what they'll do. They'll give you another point that it passes through, and so they'll say, okay, write the equation of the line that passes through these points. We're not ready for that yet. We're going to start off simple. We're going to start off to where you already know the slope. So for now, we're going to pretend you already know the slope. So just like I said, because you don't necessarily need to be given a graph. So let's say you were told the slope was 3 over 2, and you were given an ordered pair. And like I said, I'm pretending like you weren't given the visual of the graph. So let's say the ordered pair is 8, 3, and you're told the slope is 3 over 2. Your job is write this equation in point-slope form. That's what I'm instructing you to do. Write this equation in point-slope form. Well, first, let's remember what point-slope form is. So this is the format we're going to use. We're going to take our slope, and we're going to plug our slope in into for m. We're going to take our x value, plug it in for x1, take our y value, and plug it in for y1. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go to a different page so we can do this neatly. But again, this graph was just your visual, what it would look like. And by the way, in this example, you would be hard-pressed to find the equation of this line, because notice the equation of this line, we can't see where it crosses the y-axis. It's somewhere down there. We can't get to it. So it would be hard to tell slope-intercept form, because if we don't know where it crosses the y-axis, we'll never be able to find b. So we wouldn't be able to use slope-intercept form. All right, so let me go to a different page. Let's work this out in the point slope form. Alright, so here we are on a different page. Now I just want you to plug everything in, and let's say if the instructions just said write it in point slope form, this is all you would do. You're going to just first, like I said, you're only going to plug in for the things that are in color. So I'm going to just rewrite everything that's in black. Y minus y1 equal sign, open parenthesis, x minus. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to take each of those values and plug them in. Slope is 3 over 2. Okay, so I put a 3 over 2 here. Y1 is 3, put a 3 here. X1 is 8. So put an 8 here. That's it. You're done if the instructions just said write point slope form. Now, some what ifs for you to consider. If this 3 had been negative, okay, that means we would have y minus negative 3. So what do you do when you minus a negative? You end up adding. So that would really be y plus 3. So if y had been negative 3, when we plug it in, we would, right here in our equation, you would say y plus 3 instead. Now, the same thing goes as if this 8 had been negative. If that 8 had been negative, you'd be subtracting a negative in there. What happens when you subtract the negative? Well, you add. So you would just put a plus sign in there when you set this up. So I want you to know, what does it mean if one of those is negative? This is what would happen. You might want to write that down. That's important. Keep track of your negatives. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to take point slope form, because now you know how to write it. Actually, let's do one more example. Let you do it yourself. Before you do, skip some space below this one. I want to show you, we're going to do two examples side by side, how to turn this into slope-intercept form and how to turn this into standard form. So like I said, skip a few lines and write this next part. Alright, so you're going to try an example. Alright, so you try this example. Hit pause and see if you can write the information of the instruction would say something like, write the equation in point slope form of the line that passes through this point and has this given slope. So give that a shot. Hit pause. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to plug in for the y1, x1, and m. So it's always going to start off as y minus, y1 is positive 4, so y minus 4, equal sign. M is the slope. It says the slope is negative 5, put a negative 5 there. Open parenthesis, it's always going to be x right here. That was kind of sloppy. Now, it's minus x1. Well, x1 is negative 3, so we would have minus negative 3. And remember what I talked about, when you minus a negative, that means add, so we're going to put a plus 3. A plus 3 goes there. So now you're done. This is in point slope form. Now, just remember to keep track of your negatives, and if you'd asked for a different version of the linear equation, if it said, give me slope-intercept, give me standard form, that's what we would do. But for now, let's stop right here, and I'm going to show you an example. Alright, so true to what I said, let's go back to that first example. Pretend the instructions said, hey, write the equation of the line that passes through this point, has this slope, and I want you to write this equation in slope-intercept form. Or it'll say, hey, I want you to write this equation in standard form. What I'm going to show you is for both of those, we would start them off exactly the same way. We would put it in the point slope form first. So now I'm going to show you how to turn this into what we want to see. So that's what you're going to do in the spaces you provided. So I'm going to go to a new screen where I have room. We're going to show you how to convert this to the two versions we want. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert this point slope formula to slope-intercept. And here's how you do that. Before we do anything, think about what is slope-intercept form. Well, you don't have to write this down. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, meaning what's important is y is all by itself. So that's what we're going to do. We got to get y by itself, meaning we got to get this minus 3 out of there. But before we can do that, we got to get rid of this parentheses over there. So we're going to use our equation skills. We're going to simplify, get rid of that parentheses using the distributive property. So we're going to use the distributive property, and then we're going to be able to move that 3 out of there. So step 1 is always distribute. Let's do that. Y minus 3 drops down. 3 halves times x is just 3 halves x minus 8. Now you got to remember to multiply that by 8. So 3 halves times 8, that's going to actually be a pretty number. That's going to equal 12. It's a positive times a negative, so it's a negative. And my works over here, how it equals 12, so it's a 12 right there. So this is our step. So step 1 is distribute. Step 2 now is to take this minus 3 and move it over here. Because if you move it over there, you'll have y by itself. Well, how do you move minus 3 to the other side? Well, you add 3. Add 3 to both sides. And now, once you finish simplifying, you will have your equation in slope-intercept form. Negative 12 plus 3, well, that's negative 9. We're done. This is the slope-intercept form of that original equation. So if they had said, write the equation of the line that passes through this point with this given slope, and write it in slope-intercept form, we can do that. We put it in point-slope form first, and then we convert that to slope-intercept form. Now, I want to give you some generic steps to follow for this. These generic steps you should put below this example. I'm going to give you some generic steps of how to turn any point-slope form into slope-intercept form. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you standard form. So take the generic form of point-slope form. First thing you're going to do for both of these methods, to slope-intercept or to standard, is the first thing we did here is we distributed. So that's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to distribute m. So that's step 1. So I'm literally going to label that as step number 1. So step 1 is distribute m. That's what I want you to realize. Okay, so step 1 is distribute m. Now, that is really sloppy. Let me rewrite that. Alright, so step 1 is distribute m. Now, what we did after that is we moved that minus 3 to the other side. So that means step 2 is going to be move that y1, meaning that was the y coordinate we plugged in. So step 2 is we're going to move y1 to the other side. That's step 2. And then you're done as long as you take care of the math. So step 2 is move that y1 value. So that's step 2, and those are the only 2 steps we did. Just deal with the math, deal with the fractions if you have them, deal with the negatives if you have them. But these are your general steps for converting any point-slope form equation into slope-intercept form. In other words, get y all by itself. Now let's pretend our instructions were, hey, take this equation that goes through this point, this slope, or just say, here's point-slope form. It says, convert this to standard form. Here's what we're going to do. It's going to start off the same way. We're going to start off by still distributing the slope, just like I said last time. So this is going to look just like this step. So I'm just going to go ahead and go right to that. So the first step looks exactly the same. Now here's the only difference. The only difference is, in standard form, if you remember back here, nope, not there, back here, standard form is everything is on the left side. X and Y are on the left side, but C was just a regular old number. So the regular old number is on the right side, X and Y are on the left side. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to move X and Y to the left side. Well, Y is already on the left side, so we just have to move X. How do you move positive 3 halves X? Well, you subtract 3 halves X. So subtract 3 halves X from both sides. Now, if you do that, you will be left with negative 3 halves X plus Y minus 3. Well, we need that minus 3 to get out of there. So you can do it now, or you can do it at the same time, or you can do it as a separate step. For the sake of space, I'm going to do it at the same time. So let me rewrite this slightly. What I mean by that is this. We're going to go ahead and move that minus 3. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So notice, I'm moving everything that needs moved all at the same time. And you can do this in 2 separate steps. So if you do this, you'll be left with negative 3 halves X. Y is positive, so plus Y. Notice that minus 3 is gone, so equal sign. On the right side, negative 12 plus 3, well, that's negative 9. So we have minus 9 over there. Okay, or negative 9. So this is standard form. You would be done. The only issue is it's not proper to have fractions in standard form. So not proper to have fractions in standard form. So we're going to use that skill we learned of how to get rid of fractions in an equation. Meaning, to get rid of fractions in an equation, you look at your equation, look at the denominators of any of your fractions. That denominator is a 2, and we have no other denominators. So in any equation, if you multiply everything by the common denominator of whatever your denominators are of all your fractions, you can get rid of your fractions. In this case, we only have one fraction, and its denominator is a 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 2. I don't have room to really write it for the left side, so I'm going to put times 2. That's not very clear. I don't like that. So times 2. So you're going to multiply everything on the left side by 2, and then you're going to multiply everything on the right side by 2. So that's what we're going to do. So on the left side, if we do that, I'm going to move it up here to where we have room. As a side note, negative 3 halves, you don't have to write this. Negative 3 halves times 2, well, that just equals negative 3. No, in other words, the divided by 2 then times 2, they cancel out. That's the whole point. So I'm going to erase that. So that part's going to be negative 3. So we're going to be left with, if we do this, negative 3x. Now, y times 2, well, that's 2y. Now, on the right side, negative 9 times 2, well, that's negative 18. So that's your equation. You now finally have your equation in standard form. So your equation is now in standard form. Now, so just remember, it's improper to have fractions inside of your standard form equation. And I want to point out to you, and if someone was going to be even more picky, they could say, well, what if we also didn't want to have a negative leading coefficient? And if that were the case, you could be even more picky, and you could make your whole fraction positive. No, sorry, not your whole fraction. Your whole equation, give it a positive leading coefficient by now multiplying both sides by -1. Now, I'm not going to be picky, and I'm going to say this is optional, but I want you to know that it means the same thing. So -1 times -3x, well, that's positive 3x. -1 times positive 2y, well, that's -2y. On the right side, -18 times -1, well, that's positive 18. So technically, what I wrote here, this is the full, complete, proper standard form version of our final answer. But again, I'm not going to be super picky with that negative in front. I'm more concerned that you know to get rid of that fraction. That's the main cause. So it's not a big deal if A is negative, but I at least want you to know you can do this and be aware that sometimes on a test or a quiz, you may only see this as an answer choice, and you need to know that it's the same thing, even though yours would look like this. Okay, so this was standard form. And now I'm going to give you some generic steps for standard form. So, some general steps for converting point slope to standard form. Well, we did the first thing we did first on this one as well. So step 1 was distribute m. That was the same first step as before. Now, step 2 is whatever you have, your mx, you're going to take mx, step 2, because remember you're going to distribute it, so you're going to have m times x. You're going to take that, you're going to move that to the left side. So that's step 2. So step 2 is move x to the other side. Now, step 3 was, remember y1 was just a regular number. Step 3 was to move y1 over to the other side. So that was your final step. In the example we did, I did them at the same time. So step 3 is to move y1 to the other side. So step 3 was to move y1 to the other side, and then your final step is just to make sure that you simplify everything and then put it in quote-unquote proper form. And in other words, in our example, we had it with a fraction side of our equation. That's definitely not proper. So I showed you how to get rid of fractions. You multiply both sides by the denominator of that fraction. So multiply both sides by 2, and so look, we were left without a fraction. So that is proper form, but proper form for being really picky is we should have a negative leading coefficient. So these are our general steps. Write these down. Okay? You're now going to do an example to where you're going to do everything we just did. I'm going to give you an example where you're going to say, I'm going to say, here's your point, here's your slope. I want you to put it in point slope form. I want you to put it in slope-intercept form. I want you to put it in standard form. You're going to try that yourself to show that you've got it. And yes, there are going to be some negatives, so be careful. There might even be a fraction. Okay. Alright, so this is going to be our last example. You're going to try those. This is going to be our puppy. Can you imagine that timing right as I start the last example? Go away, puppy. Alright, so your final example with fractions, and I want you to write this, and when you do it, I want you to do it in point slope form, I want you to do it in slope-intercept form, and I want you to put it in standard form. But I'll give you a hint, for all of these, you're going to start with point slope form. They all start the same. So hit pause, try this, and really take your time, and then check yourself. Okay, so to put in the point slope form, that should be your easiest task. You literally just plug everything into its spot. So notice, I already have the empty shell already set up, ready to go. So let's plug everything in. It's y minus y1. Well, y1 is -5. Oh, so we have minus a negative. So you have to remember what that means. That means to minus a negative means the plus. So y plus 5, that's what goes there. Then we plug in our slope. Then we have x minus x1. Well, x1 is just positive 6, so x minus 6. So there you go. That's step 1. Step 1 was put it in point slope form. You've got it in point slope form. Now, if you haven't done so already, hit pause and turn it into slope-intercept form and turn it into standard form using your equation skills. Give that a shot. Alright, let's convert this thing to slope-intercept form. Step 1, distribute your slope. And if you do that, you'll have 1/3 x, that's an ugly x, and then 1/3 times 6, well, that's 2, and it's positive times negative, so it's negative. On the left side, you still have y plus 5. Now, to finish putting this in slope-intercept form, you got to move that, get y by itself, so we need to get rid of the plus 5. So we subtract 5 from both sides, and if we do that, we're left with y equals 1/3 x, and the right side, -2 minus 5, well, that's -7. Well, we're all done. That's slope-intercept form. We have our final answer. Now, let's convert it to standard form. So let's say you have the same thing, the same equation. Now let's turn it into standard form. Hit pause and try it if you haven't done so already. First things first, we still start by distributing. But this now it's going to be a little different. We got to move x to the left side. So I'm going to subtract. And now I'm going to do it in two different steps here, what I did in one step before, in case it got confusing. If you do that, you will have negative 1/3 x plus y plus 5 equals negative 2. Notice I didn't move the plus 5 yet, because I think it may have been confusing doing it all at once. Now move the plus 5 by subtracting, just like you would before. And so you're going to have negative 1/3 x plus y equals negative 2 minus 5 is negative 7. Now, this is standard form, but standard form is not allowed to have fractions. Standard form can only have integers. And negatives are okay, but I mostly would care more about getting rid of that fraction. So to get rid of that fraction, we're gonna look at the denominator. The denominator is a 3, so we'll multiply everything by 3. That's how we get rid of that denominator. Multiply everything by 3. And if you do that, you're going to end up with negative 1x plus 3y. And on the right side, negative 7 times 3, that's negative 21. So this is your final answer. And if you want to write that without the 1, just write negative x plus 3y equals negative 21. That's perfectly fine. That means the same thing. It's up to you if you want to keep it. But I'm fine if it's there. So that is your final answer. That is the standard form version of the original question. Meaning the original question, what is the equation of the line that passed through this point and has this slope? Alright, so make sure you check yourself. Make sure you have these. As a brief recap, we said our goals were we're going to write things in point slope form. We started by talking about the steps for doing that, okay? And then I remind you what those other, and then our other objective was we're going to turn it into any form we want. And I remind you what those forms were. And then I did an example where we turned it into point slope form, and here's where we did it. Then after that, we turned one more into point slope form, just to make sure you understood how to turn into point slope form. But then we focused on how to convert point slope form to any form we want. So we converted to slope-intercept form. I gave you some general steps. These are you can live by these. These always work. These are the general steps to turn it to slope-intercept form. We did it, and then I gave you some general steps for converting it to standard form. These were your general steps. This is what you're always going to do for every question. So keep calm, show your work, and use your equation skills, use your fraction skills, your negative skills, and you'll be just fine. And even if it has fractions. Good luck, guys. Take care.